Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shimo, and I'm joined here with my friend, Chris George. Hi, Chris.
Hello, everybody.
And Chris, we're back talking. I feel like I have deja vu.
Right, we've been here before.
But you know, it's really indicative of the interaction that we've had with our users, and we're really happy to be able to bring back a sequel discussion to the one we had just a couple of weeks ago. So welcome everyone to the CRM Cancel and Postponement Practices webinar, take 2. Now, some of you may have remembered that we had talked about this, and it really started from a conversation we had on a quick Q survey that we had. And so I am also joined here that really helped us with that quick Q survey is Terry Roberts. And Terry is in the background, and she is listening, so to speak, to the discussion board and Q&A board. And so let me make a comment about the Q&A board. We would like for you to, unless you're having some typical, technical difficulties, then certainly Nicole Mead on the SimpleView team will be there to assist you. But in terms of questions about the practices, I'm going to ask you if you can hold those questions so Terry can kind of field them after we get done explaining some of the processes and the new tool that we had been talking about. I think it is a result, right, Chris? After we did the last webinar, we had some good discussion, not only from the SimpleView team, but also from the users that allowed us the opportunity to say, hey, we might need something new to support the CVBs. And so that refers to the new process and a new report to support you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it took a little work to get there, you know, a little back and forth, but that's what I think is super cool about this. You know, like you said, we had the opportunity to learn from you guys out there, and then we had the opportunity to put our team to work to try to build a better solution, and we're going to see some of that today.
Okay, so let's, so just to refresh your memory, we had this survey originally, and what the survey really brought light is that you are all using different processes to handle the COVID-19 either cancellations and or postponements. So we're going to talk again about some of those processes that we talked about last time in the last webinar, just so that in case you weren't part of that, we'll come full circle. And so before we dive into those processes, we always like to give you an opportunity to understand what's going on in the industry for CVBs in terms of some aggregated industry data. So this is data that we're monitoring on a weekly basis. So every time we'll get together in a webinar like this or another webinar, we'll always bring forward to you some aggregated data so you can kind of see what's reality, maybe gain some insights and perhaps some hope down the road. So the reality is when we take a look at lead distribution, and this is number of leads. So the dark blue or the blue thicker line here really represents all of our collective lead generation. And you can see that in the early weeks of 2020, we have been exceeding the volume of leads being distributed prior to March 11th. So here in week 10, we could see that we start to take a drop relative over to the last several years. And it has continued to see the drop as we come into just this last week ending April 26th. So we'll continue to monitor this weekly so that we can start to talk about the bottom or the recovery. So I think this is something to pay attention to as we move forward.
Sure.
Maybe a little bit more insights about the leads that we are generating. This is the volume of leads that we are generating in this last week ending April 26th. And this is based upon the arrival date so that we could see the majority of new leads, as we would expect, is happening short term, in the year, for the year, and certainly for next year. But that doesn't mean that we aren't generating new leads that are longer term. So there is some activity out there just in this past week. The other insight is that the leads that are being generated are not just small events. In fact, only 35% of the lead volume is less than 250 rooms on peak. So some of the larger events are also, leads are being distributed. So those are just a little insights about the number of leads. And then if we look at week ending April 26th, this is about room nights now. So the blue bar represents 2019 rooms on the books, or definite on the books, relative to, and 2020 is what you see in the red bar. And the reality is that we have seen 8.3 million fewer room nights on the books versus same time last year. And when I look at the same sort of the blue being stagnant, and I take a look at where the cancellations are occurring, this is pretty what you would expect, that they're happening in May and June. And then the green really speaks to the postponed events. And you can kind of see that these events are being postponed out of April, May, June, and then July and August as well. And then where are those leads getting postponed to? So we can see that the leads naturally are getting pushed to the fall timeframe, with a significant amount of activity being rescheduled for August and into 2021. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a view for what's happening across all CVBs that are part of SimpleView CRM. Now, so this is our launching pad. We're going to talk about each CVB and how we need to define postpone. So in the last webinar, we talked about giving you some structure in terms of how you want to define postpone. So some of you are defining it that if the event moves to later dates into that calendar year. Some of you are also treating it, as I understand it, on a fiscal year. Generally, you are postponing, putting in postponed versus cancel, postponing events that are similar in the meeting structure and requirements. And one element of being postponed is that the event organizer isn't going out for a competitive bid process. This is dealing with an event that was booked in your destination that you're working with that event organizer to postpone. I think the underlying recommendation here is that we're not necessarily wanting to be prescriptive as much as we want to be recommending different views of way to look at it. But one strong recommendation that we have for you is that whatever you decide in terms of how you define postpone, is that you actually have that as a written policy for your CVBs and able to articulate that, and especially calling out how you would treat the impact of credit, especially when it comes to giving credit to sales production. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris to walk you through the processes we discussed last webinar, to just review and add some additional commentary to that, and then layer in what's new. So Chris, can you take over?
I think I can. Sorry, 1 second. So I said that. Do you give it to me now that we switched?
Okay, let me try that again.
Just next slide.
There you go.
Yeah, for some reason that won't let me do anything. Oh, there it is. Got it. I did that. All right, there we go. Sorry, everybody. A little slow, like I said, here today. Been stuck in my home office here a little bit too long, starting to lose it like some of you guys. But what we discussed, and I think one of the most important things to understand is this is somewhat situational. You know, it depends on the, like Shimo said in the last slide, the way that you know, we're going to process this new lead, this postponed event, whatever it might be. And in the last webinar, we definitely discussed this process we're looking at here, which we used as B. And in that process, the lead, you know, can stay if it does go postponed. It can stay in a definite status. But this is the situation where you're almost just picking up the room block and moving it to another date. So this is a process that very much happens outside of our extranet, really quite a bit outside of CRM, except for a couple of these data updates that we're going to talk about. We don't need new quotes. We aren't sending this out to new hotels. We're simply getting a phone call from the meeting planner, connecting with the hotel and saying, again, pick up that room block from May and drop it into August. And if that's the case, there's really two ways that we can look at it. The simple way is that lead stays in a definite status. Those new dates, new information gets confirmed and updated inside of that original lead. Then you got to make the decision if we want to backdate that, and we talk a little bit about our credit and where that credit is going to lie. Should that now be taking place in today's booking window because it was, again, rebooked with new numbers, or do we need to backdate that lead so those actions happen in the original booking window? We also had a slight variation with that, some of you guys out there, but this does rely very heavily on custom reporting. And in that process, the lead goes into a canceled status, then back into tentative. You, again, are working and managing those new dates and updating that information. The lead goes definite. Then you are deciding, again, same deal, do we want to backdate that? Do we want to push that back, or should that take place in the new booking window? Now, we'll touch a little bit on these because depending on your definition of postponed, one of the things the SimpleView support team and the CRM support team has done is they've added in a new status, a new lead status that is called postponed. So it's a booked status with the definition of postponed. So you do have the option, rather than marking it as a definite, is marking it as a definite postponed. Then you will see that this was a booking that was booked from a postponed event. So we'll see a little bit more about that when we get into a few slides down the road. But SimpleView did add in a new status so you can more easily track booked postponed events. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we go. But that's step two. Again, that has some custom work inside of it. You are relying solely on custom reporting. So in our opinion, if we are just picking up and moving the block, B1 would be the way to go there. Now from there, we talked about the situation where we may need to go out to get new information. Now we know in a lot of these instances, they may not just be able to simply move the block. We may need to look at different hotels. The meeting planner might have different requirements. We may need to collect new responses back from our hoteliers. So in those examples, we use process A, where the original lead goes into a canceled status. We then create a new lead because we have fresh information. We got to send it out again to new hotels, new requirements, those types of things. So we create a new lead, call it 345. We use our standard process to send that lead out to collect responses from the hotels to then mark that lead as a definite. And now we have a couple of choices there again. It all comes down to that credit there in the end, that last column on the right. Well, do we need to, again, backdate that new lead? Or is it okay in the current booking window? So again, in some of those situations, should the credit take place in the original booking frame, or should, again, it take place in today's booking window because it went booked today? Now, for some of you, that's where it gets a little bit tricky, and there's, again, some internal processes with that. Some of you might consider this to be a new lead because you are going through this entire process. So to see that it went originally booked and canceled in May, then was booked as a new lead in, you know, September or whatever it might be, that's just going to be counted in those two different buckets. But if you want to backdate it, so again, it all takes place in that original booking window, then you would go with process A1 there. So those were the two big ones, and we'll see some kind of, I guess, pros and cons with a few of those. But what that prompted us to do is add in a new process. And this has to do with those new lead statuses that I've mentioned. So in that instance, the lead goes postponed. So we can change the original lead 1, 2, 3, to a new postponed lead status. And by that, I mean the definition is postponed, but the lead type is of lead, meaning it's tentative. It's out to bid again. Once we save that, nice little easy way to do it is you can just clone that lead to copy over, 90% of the information, because many of the requirements might still be the same. So I'm cloning it to create a second 1 or 3, 4, 5. We're going to send that lead out like we normally do, send it out to our partners through the extranet. They're going to respond through that lead. Well, then we can come back, and a very clean option would be to go back and update the original lead 1, 2, 3 to now the definite postponed new lead status, updating it with all the new contracted information, the new selected hotels, etc. Then you can simply delete the cloned lead 3, 4, 5. So again, I'm going to hit that one more time, because you're going to mark the original lead as postponed. So, but still in an open status. You clone it to create the copy, send the copy and manage it as we do. Then again, depending on credit, you can simply delete the cloned lead after you update 1, 2, 3 into that definite postponed status and with all that new information. Does that sound clear? Clear as mud, I guess, with some of those types of things. But then I think we'll see a little bit of the reasons why. Sorry, I'm having a heck of a computer day. Here we go. Sorry, there it is. Everything's, I'm having a rough time. So looking at that, we kind of see some options. And again, some of these things that are kind of scenario driven. And I know, Shimo, we've talked about things like making sure that we're backdating to not double dip in certain situations. And so we look at that with number 2 there to prevent the double dipping. Then A1 is a good method. And that new A3 is going to give us the full effect all the way through. So is the meeting simply moving? We're just picking it up and dropping it? Well, that's B1. That was the easier method there. And we'll take a quick look back at the slides. A2 was a bit of a complication there because that was the custom version. So again, we're picking it up and we're dropping it. B2 would be the way to go there. We want to make sure, again, we don't want to avoid custom reporting. So again, B1 just takes the precedent over B2. Excuse me. Super slow. There we go. And then in most situations, we want to have a canceled report so we can pull that information in. The A set works for that. And then the B2 set, again, has a little bit of an issue there because we would have to be dealing with custom reports in those situations. So Shima, I don't know if you have any thoughts or any questions on that stuff before we move on.
Well, I think that it is about those 3 things that you want to manage. One is, do you need a canceled report? Are you needing to really capture the cancellation and postponed bookings? Like, are you going to need to be able to articulate that to stakeholders at some point? So that's kind of the first consideration. The second consideration has to do with how you want to handle the credit, right? So having full transparency to how you handle that and when is the right time frame for the credit, right? That's why some of you are backdating the original lead. So that's probably the second consideration. And then, the third consideration probably has to do, Chris, with how they're handling the process. Do they need to put it back into the member partner extranet in order to distribute it? And in that case, again, having the full view. So I think that really, because of those 3 things, is why the team at SimpleView decided to give you a new tool that would be giving you full tracking of canceled and postponed events and giving you the ability to report on that. So I think it's probably good to go and see how that process actually works, Chris.
Sure, yeah, we'll take a look at that. I think that's a good measure. We now have a better way to determine postponed versus canceled and take it to that next step, and then to be able to determine when a lead goes definite, was it a definite from a postponed event, or was it a definite from just an original booking? So we get a little bit extra.
And I think, Chris, we're kind of in a fluid environment. So one of the things that we were really talking about with the team at SimpleView is that, sure, things might be kind of fluid, right? So you did make this transaction once and the group did move to August or maybe move to September, but you might be dealing again with maybe some movement on that particular event. So we tried to kind of think about what might occur and giving you full ability to be able to manage those situations.
Yeah, we can go, yeah, you're exactly right. Makes it much more clear, I think, along those routes. So the team added in a new postponed status of a booked status type called postponed. Now you guys will need to go in and activate that status if, based on the last slides, you would like to determine, to see how your bookings will be your definites, and now your postpones, they're still a booked status type. They will just be labeled as postponed, so we can pull those out into separate reports. And we're going to suggest, again, based on the slide earlier, that you add in a lead status type of postponed as well. So just so we're clear, this one here, the second one, lead postponed, that means it's tentative, it's out for bid again. Postponed booked would be used when it goes booked and we want to determine that it was from a postponed event that was then booked. So your system admins will have the opportunity to come into the admin area under drop downs and lead statuses. They'll simply be able to activate, simply turning activate to yes underneath the postponed booked. And then again, if you want to have one of those that's a pending, a tentative lead postponed status, you're going to give it a title like lead postponed. Select the status type of lead. That means it's out for distribution. It will display on your extranet. Once those have been loaded up, that's going to then show that action underneath your snapshot history, and under your lead audit sections. So in this one, we can see that this lead was originally booked on February 27th, then was booked from the postponement there again in, I guess that's March. So we can see that it was definite and then booked again, postponed definite there in March 6th. We will also see that for those of you guys who are using your reporting underneath the status history. So there we can see the same example on the left. And under the lead audit details, which will show all the changes between those different status updates. So we can see there on the right, the old value and the new value. So when the dates change, the number of rooms change, the number of attendees change, etc., we'll still be able to see those nuances underneath the lead audit details section. And what you got to make sure you're doing is that when a DMO is contacted to postpone the lead, that we should move the lead into that new postponed status, either into that lead postponed status because it's going out to booking again or out to bid again, or if it's just been picked up and moved and dropped, you can simply say that it's a booked postponed status, so that can be pulled into separate reports. So on the left-hand column, we're just seeing the lead detail page. When you're looking at a lead and reviewing it, you see the status there that needs to be moved. And then underneath the lead form, simply make sure you're updating the appropriate status field. And the next thing we did is we added in a report so you guys can start to pull these things out separately. So there's a new report in everyone's system called the postponed leads report. And this is based off the status history report. So anytime a lead in any of your sales user groups is set with one of those postponed lead status types, it's going to be reflected underneath this report. And the report is broken down into just a couple of sections. You can filter by the meeting start and end date. I'm sorry, the status history dates. In this one, this is going to be when the status changed to postpone. You'll be able to see that option. Be able to refine it by user groups. Some of you have more than one meeting sales user group. You might have your sports status separated out. Do you want to use the same process in both groups? Well, if I go back to the setup slide, you will then need to manage that in both of your sales groups. So again, if you have a sports group, you'll have to go in and add those and activate those underneath admin, drop downs, lead statuses. And so from there, we see the two sections of the report. I apologize, my buttons are sticky. The top part is just going to give you a brief summary. It's going to show you the number of leads, and it's going to show you the total number of room attendees, show attendees, and the amount of estimated economic impact, the value from those 3 postponed leads, those 3 leads that went postponed during the selected date range. And then down below, we see the details of each of those leads. So again, same example, the last slide said we had 3, and it totaled up all the numbers that we see down here in the summary. But now we're seeing for each individual lead, the dates, we're seeing the lead status, the current status, the date it was postponed, their current arrival date, their current departure date, the estimated economic value, requested rooms, and contracted rooms where available. So a nice way to just simply be able to pull those all out and take a look at your postponed events separately. So those are the big ones that I have for you guys. Again, you need to make sure we're reaching out to our admins because there is a little bit of admin setup that's required for those guys. We need to add in or activate the new option. And if we want to go with a lead postponed status as well, we're going to get that in there. Everyone should have access to the lead, to the new postponed reports. And we really want to just make sure everybody will get this slide deck posted for everybody so you can define your processes to make sure they're matching with one of ours.
So Terry, I guess now we wanted to make sure that we had ample time to really field some questions from the attendees. So Terry, do we have any questions?
Oh yeah, you can count on that, you guys. So I'll start with Andrea in Fort Worth. So her first comment was that she likes the new process, so that's good. But she does specifically have a question about the impact that what impact does the new status have for our custom productivity reports? Will it include these new statuses, Chris?
It all depends on the report. It's hard to just say that. There are different reports. Most likely you will have to review that with your analyst and have those pulled in. It just really does depend on what type of report we're talking about. But off the top of my head, you would definitely need to evaluate that and take a look with your analyst.
Okay, so Tim in Ann Arbor wants to know, and I think you kind of answered this, but I just want to make sure that it got clarified. So is the meeting only sitting in the postponed status until you have the new dates, or does it always stay in postponed?
Well, there are 2 postponed status types we're suggesting. One is that open, that it's open for business. That's this guy, you're out to bid. Then when it goes booked, we have the booked new status type as well. So let me just get that slide up here. That's these 2 on the right. So if it is out for distribution, then once it is actually booked, we would use each of those statuses in that situation. Now, you don't have to necessarily use the lead postponed. It just depends on, again, the scenario. If you want it to be out to bid to show that, that it got pushed back out, then you would want to have that in there. But you would change it from the postponed lead to a booked postponed status.
Okay. Melissa is making a comment and then asking for verification. So with using the new postponed status, since you're technically just changing the dates, will that not really then show the overall loss during the May to June dates? It will just look like there was no business available during those months.
I think I'm going to need that again. Sorry.
Okay, maybe I'm going to try to see if Melissa has the right option for me to unmute her, because then she may be able to elaborate. Hey, Melissa, can you talk to us?
Hi, Chris. This is Missy in Cleveland. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Okay, so my question is, if we're changing this, so currently what we are doing is if a group is moving and they're currently definite, we have canceled the lead and we have then cloned it, opened up a new lead, did whatever we needed to do, whether it was actually sending it out to the hotels or just changing the dates. And then we're turning that definite once we know the current dates and we have those confirmed. What is showing that we do have this great loss in the months March through June. If we went with this new process, it's going to show we're just changing those dates. It's not going to show the significance of the impact that we have in March through June.
That would be correct. Yeah.
So how would we make up for it? It's one of those, right now we know why we have March through June, there's no business, but in 5 years when we're looking at history, maybe somebody else, you never know, maybe they don't understand. It's like, well, why didn't we have any business booked March through June? Why was the city closed?
Well, Well, I guess in those situations, if I'm understanding you originally, you had the original canceled, you're creating the new one. So we should be able to show that you know, the canceled numbers and those types of things, the new numbers, and then via some reporting, we can figure that out. There should be a way to show that ebbs and flows. There is a way to show that because it is a new lead.
The way that we are doing it, but I'm concerned with the new postponed status and not actually losing those, but just eventually just changing the dates. That you're just going to show a void during these months.
So one of the benefits, Chris, is, and this is the question, in the A3 process, one of the benefits was to give the full transparency to this particular booking. So if they needed to be able to articulate, like I think, Melissa, you're asking, is they need to be able to report out that we had all these cancels and this one was a postponed. But it definitely came out of March. My understanding was that the new report was going to be able to articulate that.
Yeah, because I mean, you are seeing all of those that were shifted over with that postponed status, so it should be able to identify those numbers there. Yeah, and I guess I can get some more information to make sure that I'm clear.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're good, because I guess the other option is just that you don't delete the second one. And then you have the original that was canceled, you have the new one and all that information. So you'd be looking at, you know, that they would then be the credit when that credit takes place in that example.
All right, I'm going to try to unmute Juliet too, because she has a couple questions and I think it might be easier for her to speak if she can. Hey, Juliet.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I have a few questions. I'm sorry. Please bear with me. Okay, so what's the thought process behind cloning the lead? Like what did you guys have in mind in terms of just being able to send it out, collect new information, then transpose it to the original lead?
That's exactly it. Yeah. So either creating a new lead or cloning a new lead. You're doing the same thing. You're creating a new lead. Clone just copies most of the information over to the new version. So you don't have to cherry pick. You don't have to copy and paste from one to the other. You can open up the new one cloned and then just edit any of the content that's in there rather than building it from scratch and typing all that information in. So it can reduce some error and save you some time.
And that's just for the purpose of getting new bids out from the hotels.
Just that's it. You have different requirements, so you need a different, lead. You also might be sending it to different hotels who may or may not have the same original availability. So you're exactly right. You're kicking that one, you basically back up to the hotels through the extranet to collect new responses on new information.
Okay. And then my second question, would you guys recommend us running the calculator once we change it to the postponed status, or will it just use the calculation from when it went definite?
Well, if you have the definite tag still attached to it, then it will collect the information. So you don't need to create another postponed EEI formula unless the information is different. So in this example, when we're sending it back out to bid, well, when it goes booked, it very well may have very different numbers than it did originally. So you may need to run a new formula because, again, those numbers are going to be different number of attendees, different length of stay, those types of things.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. And then my last question, sorry. So if a meeting took place in April and then we revise the dates, we have it tagged, we have a bunch of those kinds of leads that we don't have too many of them, but let's say they moved all their dates, like you said, and we picked it up and moved it, but then it ultimately canceled. Is there anything that we need to be doing on the back end in terms of those kinds of leads? Because a lot of them, that's kind of what the trend is for us, at least, where we're doing process B1, but then it ultimately cancels because nobody has any clue when anything's opening back up. So I just want to make sure that we're not missing anything on the back end.
No, not in that situation. Again, they're just picking up and moving them. Now you would change that to a canceled, and then you would see that it was canceled. Maybe it was rebooked into July, and then come June they canceled. So we just want to make sure you're updating the status of that lead to canceled in that situation, so it's reflected that it is an actual, in that case, canceled event, and that's pretty clear. Once they say we are not coming, canceled, and we're done with most of these types of things.
Right.
It's just
The one challenge with B1 is that you don't capture the canceled in March where it occurred originally. And one of the things that we have strived for is to give you full reporting capability to be able to articulate that it canceled in March, it went definite for August, but then it may have to cancel again. So, you're going to want to understand business that is being taken off the books and be able to report accordingly. So B1 is not necessarily the process that's going to give that to you. The process that's going to give that to you in terms of being able to understand canceled and postponed events and then maybe canceled again would be A3.
Got you. So then any ones that we've done that to in the past, prior to obviously these processes being more flushed out, we should just go ahead and update them to process A3, even though they're ultimately canceled.
Is that what you would recommend on transactions that they have done, Chris?
We have to look at everybody's individual processes, and then your analyst needs to look at how you are currently handling them and to be able to make the adjustment to move them over. So it's all doable. We're just I think it is somewhat case by case and DMO by DMO. So I do think you'd be better suited to talk to your analyst about that, because then we need to think a little bit also about there may be additional reporting needs. If we go back through today and changed everything to this new postponed status, well, that's going to make a snapshot record of today that it was postponed. So you definitely need to work this out with your analyst.
Okay, thank you so much, guys.
Not a problem.
All right, if you ask multiple questions, just so you know, you're going to get yourself unmuted because, at some point I just have to go, all right, you're on. So next up, hey, Troy, let me see if I can get Troy in Seattle unmuted here for you. Hey, Troy.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
All right, so I apologize. I'm coming into this a little bit late. I was having difficulties logging on, so you may have covered this already. But one of the questions I had was around the idea of why wouldn't the original lead be marked as postponed, just stay in the same dates it was already occupying, but then just not count toward the numbers? Then the new quote unquote cloned lead with new dates be the one that does count for credit in the numbers. That way the original lead still shows something used to be in the city over the original dates versus changing them to the future dates. Does that make sense?
I think so. Can you repeat that a little bit just from the start?
So I have a group. Let's call it the group 1, 2, 3. They are asking us hey, we're not going to be able to do our event this year. We'd like to postpone. So we go ahead and we postpone their lead in Simple View and thus create a cloned lead. So we'll call that one ABC versus 1, 2, 3. So the cloned lead is ABC. Why wouldn't the original clone 1, 2, 3 stay exactly where it is and thus no longer count on our numbers? And that way it shows that it's there used to be a group in the original dates, and then the cloned lead, which would be ABC at this point, would show that it's a rebooking of a postponed group in this set of dates. And then that's where the numbers would then count. So it takes the numbers away from the original dates and attributes them to the new dates. But then it also shows that the original lead used to occupy the original dates. This is kind of piggybacking onto what I think it was Melissa from Cleveland was saying.
Yeah, and I think if I'm understanding those, got it all the way through, that's the difference between A1 and A2, really. Do we need to backdate that stuff, or do we need to keep it, in the new booking window and term? So if you wanted to mark those with a definite postponed status, you can then do the same thing. In that instance, you aren't deleting the original. With both of those, you're keeping the original.
Mm-hmm.
You're either backdating or you're keeping it as that second lead.
Okay.
Does that answer it? Am I getting you?
Somewhat. I mean, I'm still a little foggy on the whole thing. So it sounds like it does answer it.
Yeah, I mean, in those instances, yeah, you're cloning, you're creating a new lead with new requirements. The original stays. and you're adding the new one, then you're either going to backdate it, again, to push that back, or you're going to keep that in with the short-term lead and definite booking window.
Okay.
All right, so our friend Angie Vanberg in the beautiful destination of Louisville is actually going to ask for another webinar. Come on, Angie. She wants to know if there's going to be a future webinar that will address how we should account for the room block decreases, attendance decreases on meetings due to COVID that finally do happen. Showing this on our city lead log will help identify areas where we can book more business, but currently we never adjust our definite room blocks because that would impact our past reporting. It's interesting.
So, I think, Angie, we always have to kind of ask the question of ourselves about what do we want reflected in our reports? Because I think that if you do room block revisions, right, that event then is reflected to be smaller. Is that important for you to report, to your stakeholders? So I think that we always want to kind of design our processes for the end in mind, if you will, and because it's not a credit issue at that point. It's just accurately reflecting what is definite on your books at the time. So if it's important because that event changed, then your definite rooms on the books, whatever that is, do you want it to be what it was originally, or what it's accurately reflecting in their new dates?
Angie, does that answer your question, Angie? I don't think she picked up to talk to us. I thought we might get to hear her sweet voice, but evidently not. All right, let me see. We do still have some questions. So a couple of succinct ones. Patricia wants to know, can an assist status be changed to postponed?
It can, yeah, absolutely. You can also create an assist postponed status if you would like to collect, and track that it was an assist that was postponed.
All right. Where will postponed status show up on the city league log? I think that's also from Angie. Where will the postponed status show up on the city lead log?
I've got to think that one through. Sorry, I'm going to try to take a quick look while we're talking.
Okay.
Well, it depends. The city lead log, those are considered, if you're using the new booked postponed status, then they will show up in here as booked pieces of business. I'm looking at the city lead log. There's nothing in this report that pulls those things out separate. So they will be wrapped up in with the definites and in with the leads and in with the assists in this report if the lead meets that criteria, that lead status. So if the lead status is booked postponed, it will display in the city lead log under the definites. If it's in underneath lead postponed, it will display under the city lead log as a lead. And if it's assist postponed, same deal, it will show up here as an assist booked postponed event.
All right. I feel like this, I'm thinking about creating a drinking game. So every time the word postponed gets said, you know what happens, Chris, you're in trouble. I'm going to see if I can get to Tina in Asheville for a couple of questions. Hey, Tina, can you speak with us? I think maybe not. So let me see. She had some questions about, are you recommending this status as a must? Do you have to use the postponed status? And the answer to that question is no, right? It's an elective opportunity, right? Depending on how it serves you.
That is absolutely correct. We didn't turn it on by default. We built it and loaded it. So your system admins still have to activate it if you guys choose to move forward with that.
Okay. From Nicolette, for process A, why do you recommend deleting the cloned lead? Wouldn't we want to save those responses?
Again, that's it. You have those choices. Those are things that are up to you. Now, it's either you're deleting it because you want it to take place in the original booking window. So you're just using the original lead for that information. But to your point, if you want to keep the responses, then you wouldn't delete it, So it's one of those things, again, you can't have, each piece, or you would transfer those responses to the existing lead. So that's pretty much it. You can still manually go back in and add those responses back to the existing lead before you delete it. So if you do want to keep those hotel news responses, you will, like a few of the things, you're going to have to update the room block, the attendees, the responses. There is some work still to, and again, to get the original lead updated with the new lead's details.
Okay. All right, here's, let me see. Let me go down here. All right, so looks like we got that taken care of. Juanita's agreeing with Angie, right? Several groups are moving to virtual meetings, and thus the room block has moved from a peak of 300 to 5 in that case. So another question from Tim. Are you only supposed to be looking at postponing in the calendar year? My meeting in June 20 has picked up and moved to June 2021, but it is keeping the same requirements. Is this a postponed or a brand new lead because it's moving to a brand new year? And we did address that a little bit in terms of some people choosing to keep it postponed even if it falls in the new fiscal year. Again, it's kind of a individual decision. Is that right, Chris?
Yeah, that's one. It's a little bit tough because it does not come into like credit and some of those types of things. We're looking into a future report. And then in the future, you're looking back at your past reports or from the previous year.
I think, Terry, this is where we would recommend that each CVB has a policy, something that's documenting exactly how they're going to take credit for bookings. And, and I can't stress that enough, because having written documentation about how you're going to handle whether it's in the year, for the year, right, that you're actually moving it within a calendar year, or whether you're moving it within your own fiscal year. I think that it boils down to how your stakeholders would interpret if you're going to get credit again for it. Now, that's not to say that salespeople aren't doing all the work all over again. That's certainly the case. But if it is the same booking, you have to kind of see how will your stakeholders and will you be adding or decreasing credibility based upon how you're going to handle it and how you're going to handle the credit piece of it. So that's what is most important for you all to decide as an organization, how credit is going to be handled. And that needs to be in writing.
Yeah, and I would just, I guess, Jimo, wouldn't you say that credit can mean something different to your internal team as to the external community? It could be a new sales manager who should get credit for that lead because he or she went through that whole new process. He or she may have goal measurements and those types of things associated with it. But to the public, is that a new lead, that you guys should be getting credit for as an organization? So I think there are some variables there.
Yeah, team credit versus individual booking credit. And anything that has to do with monetary reward should be taken very seriously and be scrutinized because you have to kind of also understand where your stakeholders are coming from as well. So I think that this is something you should vet very carefully within your organizations and have it in writing. It's hard for us to say what should be the industry standard because in our analysis of how you're all handling this, many of you are protecting, making sure you're not getting credit for bookings that you've already received credit for.
All right, I'm going to go back and unmute. I can't tell if Jackie and Angie are both coming in under the same. Hey, Jackie.
I'm pretty sure I'm unmuted.
We
Hey
can
there,
hear you,
Jackie.
Jackie.
I have you now.
Hello?
Go
Hello.
ahead.
Angie, are you there?
I guess I got unmuted this time. We're unmuted together, Jackie.
Yeah, now I've got you both.
Thank you so much. Hi, Shimo. You have perfect hair as always.
Thank you, Angie.
Chris, your beard looks good.
Thank you, man. Weird.
Yeah, and so potentially this could be a future webinar discussion. You know, we definitely want to show our value to our hotel partners, and we've never been in a situation like this where we'll be able to identify much larger decreases in what we had anticipated in room blocks. I mean, I hope that's not the case, but I think that's, you know, where we all feel like we're going for the next several months. And so in being able to adjust the definite room blocks and show that on our city lead log, we'll be able to identify those booking holes, especially for our meetings team that books, you know, self-contained hotel business. So your advice about how to adjust those definite room blocks that have been maybe in the system 3, 4, 5 years to accurately reflect the impact of COVID and not damage the integrity of our past reporting.
Sure. Yeah, I'm sure we will have more to come with this. It's definitely an ongoing, ever-changing situation. You know, every week we're discovering something new, and we're seeing, you know, the effects. So we will have more to come.
And I think, Jackie, you wanted to ask too about, can anyone change the status, right? Or can you, that only admins can do that?
Right. I just can't remember off the top of my head if, like, so for example, right now, only admins can edit certain things on definite leads. Would the postponed have the same sort of protection? Or would it be more like a tentative where the sales managers or whoever could make changes to it freely?
I'm gonna have to check on that. I think where we're going, I can do that.
So maybe what we'll do, Jackie, is when we push the notes out, which will go out tonight, some of these outstanding questions will clarify in the notes of that, what we push out.
It's perfect. That's fine. If you don't have the answer now, that's fine.
As of right now, if you don't have anything additional in place, a non-admin can update a lead from a definite to either of the postponed statuses. To the definite postponed status, I'm sorry, I should say.
And so a non-admin could also change a definite into a postponed status, or an admin would have to do that?
At this point, a non-admin can do that.
Oh. Okay.
All right.
All right. Couple of more, we'll make sure, try to get through these. So if a definite lead in, say, April 2020 is postponed to a later date in September 2020, we currently update the lead with the new dates and tag it as postponed, canceled, COVID-19. Nothing changed on the lead, only in the new dates, and we keep it in definite status. In this case, do we move the lead to postponed or leave it as a definite? Do you understand that, Chris? I know.
I'm gonna need one more time. Yeah, I got a lot of these running through my head. One more time, please.
It's okay. If our definite lead in April is postponed to a later date in September, they're currently updating the lead with new lead dates and tagging it just as postponed. Nothing changed in the lead, only the new dates. We keep it in the definite status. In this case, do we move the lead to postponed status or just leave it as definite?
It's going to be your choice, because in my opinion, I guess that is an example of a postponed definite lead. That is the new core status that we added. If they've moved it, it was postponed. You want to look at it and say this one had original dates because it is in the postponed booked status.
In currently how they're doing it, Chris, would be a descriptive of B1.
Mm-hmm.
Then the only downside, the downside to that is that you won't be articulating in a report that says that lead canceled well, not canceled, but moved out of April. So you won't have record of that to be able to report to stakeholders. So that's just the only downside of B1.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's why we created the report, to give you the ability to articulate the fact that you're losing out in April, but you're gaining room nights in September.
So Diana Pierce just wants a little clarification. The value of choosing A3 is the fact that you have one report that details out, canceled, and postponed together.
Or separate, sure. Yes.
Chris, did you have a copy of that report up on the screen?
I can pull one up. Well, there's an example. If I just go through, I have the deck still. You have the deck.
Because I think the visual would be helpful.
There is the report results.
Right. So there's the report and what that looks like, being able to get those. We're almost to the end, believe it or not. So Nicolette would like to just, again, for a little bit of clarification, my understanding is that we wouldn't be able to import the clone leads responses into the new lead. Clone leads responses to the original 1, 2, 3. If I cancel a lead, rooms are, so is that true?
You cannot clone responses from one lead to another.
Okay.
That is, if I'm understanding, yes, that is.
That is correct. All right. And then once business is back, are you going to keep this postponed status, or do you think that this is just as it relates to COVID reflecting at this point, Chris?
Well, I think this is a process to move forward with. I mean, obviously, and hopefully, and you guys said it, knock on wood, we don't have an experience like this that has really brought it to light. But many of us, depending on where we're at, unfortunately in this day and age, whether it be, natural disaster or something in the press or something like that, we're dealing with cancelizations and we're dealing with postponements. It just all depends. So I do think that once you implement the process, it makes sense for other situations further down the line. I'm quite sure events postponed for all different kinds of reasons. Obviously, the frequency of it won't be anywhere near the same, but the process works.
Yeah, and Andrea in Fort Worth just saying that she thinks cloning, the ability to be able to clone responses would really be a great feature.
Okay, we can make note of that.
Okay. A little clarification for April. Clarification on the postponed status. Since it is a booked status type, it won't show up as a new booking for the month that the status change occurred. Is that correct? Want me to repeat?
One more time for me?
Just a little clarification on the postponed status. So since it is a booked status type, it won't show up as a new booking for the month that the status change occurs.
If I'm understanding you, yes, yes, you are correct.
Let me get to April, because I might be able just to quickly unmute her. And if I can, we'll just make sure that we've adequately addressed her question. Let me see. I'm going to go to you, April, and see if I can get you unmuted. Hey, April.
Aloha from Hawaii.
Oh.
Hi, April.
Hi. So yeah, I was just concerned. Our DMO primarily uses custom reporting anyway, but just for the core reports, I was just wondering, since a postponed status type is considered as a book type, it won't show up as a new booking when the status changes, right? It'll keep the original definite booking date.
Sorry, you are correct. You would just see, let's say, to make it simple, let's say when it goes booked, postponed, the second time there was 100 more rooms. Well, that month you would see +0 leads, but +100 more rooms.
Got it.
Not counted as a second lead, but it would track the ebbs and the flows, the plus or the minus of it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right.
All right, I think that brings us to the end of the majority of our questions, unless anyone wants to jump in. We will be sending out the deck and the webinar recording to everyone who registered today. And Chris, I think your advice at the end of the last webinar was if people have really destination specific questions or still are unsure about how they want to handle an internal process, that they should reach out directly to their CRM analyst. And I know that you and your team went through a lot of review of these processes, and everyone should be fairly up to speed in terms of advising people directly, correct?
That is correct, yep.
All right, everyone. Shimo?
Well, thank you. And thank you, Chris and Terry and Nicole and everyone for attending. Looking forward to any of the future webinars. And Angie, I think you have a good idea for one. So thank you for that. Everyone have a good evening.
All right, thanks everyone.